I'm gonna cry.
Oh.
It's been,
Mhm.
did not see that coming, but it's been really satisfying because this is a very personal story.
Mhm.
And especially when I was up in Seattle, where half of the book takes place, and it takes place during a specific time in my life when I was in my 20s, to be up there with a lot of the people who experienced this story with me and to see how meaningful it was to them to have the story told has made everything about writing the book worthwhile.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
something wonderful about just having gathering. Before the event started, you were talking about how this feels like a wedding.
Yeah.
And half of the room are people that you know, and then another half is people who you're now becoming acquainted
Mhm,
with
yes.
because they're here and celebrating the
Yeah.
book and the story.
Yeah.
So that's such a wonderful and beautiful comparison to have that intimacy with this book.
It is. People have had a really personal response to the book, which has been a little bit overwhelming at times, because so many people have reached out who have already read the book, and they are finding all of their personal experiences woven in, not just people who lived through the 90s, or who were in their 20s in the 90s, but also just people thinking about the time in their life when they came of age as an adult. So it's been really interesting to hear people from all different backgrounds and all different, from different places connect on the same level with these characters.
And with these characters, Kate and
Yeah.
Frida, they have an instant connection. I
Yeah.
mean, they start pouring their lives to each other through these letters
Yeah.
in an instant. How was creating that pathway between them to have this connection, and what was something that you really wanted to focus on so that they could really arrive to each other?
Well, I talk about this a little bit in the author's note, because the character of Kate is based on me. It's very autobiographical. And a lot of the character of Frida is based on who I wanted to be. So in some ways, it's a conversation between these two parts of myself when I was younger, the person who I was, working at this bookstore and very insecure and trying to find my way. And then you've got Frida, who's just boldly out in the world. She wants to be a foreign war correspondent. And so, in a sense, when I was writing, I was talking to myself. As the letters go back and forth, I'm having this conversation with myself and exploring a lot of things that were significant to me during that time period.
Yes, and the story is deeply nostalgic. Reading
Incredible.
through, of course, it's the 90s, which
Yeah.
is such a time capsule.
Mhm.
Not too many decades ago, but still, we're removed from that time.
Yes.
The story is deeply nostalgic and also deals with tragedy.
Yes.
So how did you marry the two of them, to nostalgia and tragedy together, to really show the human experience?
I don't know if it was nostalgia, but being able to, there are two things that happen in the book. One of them is one of the characters, her grandpa has a stroke. So there's a personal tragedy. And then it also takes place, part of it, during the siege of Sarajevo. So there is a much bigger tragedy, a global tragedy taking place. And I don't know if I'm not sure if I'm going to answer this question exactly, but it's not necessarily this nostalgia, but it was writing about those things during that time period gave the characters an opportunity to explore certain things at a pace that doesn't exist today, because everything's happening so fast, the way we're communicating personally with each other and the way we're also ingesting information. And we know everything that's happening in the world right now is coming at us 90 miles an hour, and there's not a single opportunity to just stop and reflect. Whereas these characters were able to, they're writing in letters, so obviously it's a very, very slow pace at which they're sharing information, but they also have all this time to really think about what's happening. And 1,000 friends aren't texting Kate about her grandpa's stroke, and she's not posting her sadness on Facebook, and she is experiencing what's happening in a very intimate way. And so it's not the nostalgia of the time period, but it's the time period was very important to how to tell the story of these two women.
Yes. And looking back, nostalgia would just be a piece of the story, of this grander piece of connection through tragedy, but also through discovery. And then how, all of the little tidbits help the timeline go by. But I will say that a lot of the letters that are being written between them, it's like within a week of each other. They'll receive the letter, read the letter, and then they're immediately pen to paper.
That's how you would get a letter and you'd be like, you'd read it and then you'd just sit down and you'd spend 2 hours, writing this letter, but you would just be right there and you'd respond in the immediacy of your moment. And then it goes out, and spends the time crossing the Atlantic, and then they respond immediately again.
And I'll say that when I was in college, my grandmother and I would exchange letters.
Okay.
And the night before I left for college, she gave me this floral envelope with stationery and stamps and envelopes. And now I could cry. She asked me for my address, and I was just going to write it on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
She said, I want you to send me a letter. And that's how I gave her my address. And for 4 years, and then for another 4 years when I was in graduate school, that's how we would exchange letters. And when it was Halloween, we would share Halloween cards, or Valentine's Day, whatnot. So I looked forward to those holidays because I'm like, okay, I can pick this up from my grandmother. And so letters are just deeply personal, just pen to paper, heart to paper.
And think about all those letters that you have now.
Yes.
So think about that record of your relationship with your grandma that people don't have anymore.
Right.
Like you can go back and read through those letters and be with her in immediate moments of her life because she was writing to you from those moments.
Yes. And, email and text message, you can go back and you can see the dates and times and what was going on in your life. But there's really just something special about the ink is still on the page. And
somebody's hand touched that page.
Yes. And the stamp, it's a stamp of a rainbow, or it's a stamp of even the American flag is just like, it helps measure a moment in time.
Yeah.
So Kate, what I enjoyed about her is how she poured her insecurities onto the page. And it brings this awareness instead of this sort of self-deprecating, like, this is how I feel. I don't know if I'm good enough. It's really just her expressing how she feels to Frida. How was giving that pathway to Kate for her to share that through her letters to someone who she's still getting to know, that person being Frida?
Do you mean for me as a writer,
or just for you as a writer, for Kate as the character to have that journey throughout the course of the story?
It was interesting because I went back and read a lot of my diaries from that time. And so a lot of the insecurity is just directly from one page to another page. But it felt really good to be able to let Kate express herself in that way, and to find this person because these two characters trust each other immediately. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I hadn't really thought about until we're having this conversation. It wasn't just that they were opened up to one another immediately. They had a sense of trust, something that connected them. And I don't know that Kate, it sounds weird, but I don't know that Kate really realized how insecure she was. I think it was just who she was. And she was sharing these things with this person who was also, as much as she trusted her, was at a safe distance. She wasn't any of the people in the bookstore who were super smart, who would know immediately what she didn't know. And she was able you didn't have to see Frida every day face to face.
Mhm.
So I think that also made it easier for her. But going back to letter writing, there's something that happens when you're writing a letter. And since you've written so many, you know what it is. You kind of lose your self-consciousness as you're writing to somebody. That wall comes down. And I think that's really what happened to Kate as she started writing these letters back and forth. And also, the character of Frida, even though she's out there boldly trying to become a war correspondent, she's insecure too.
Mhm.
And it comes through more of as an undercurrent, as opposed to on the surface, the way Kate just throws it out there.
And there's a moment in the book when Frida literally says, "I'm scared."
Yeah.
And those two words
Yeah.
hold so much weight. And
Thank
she's
you.
she's in this war-torn country.
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, you should be scared. You're not in
Yeah.
Paris anymore. You're
No.
not on the river.
Yeah.
You're not sipping wine
Yeah,
and bread, and you're away from the horrors that are in the newspapers or even on the
Yeah.
television. And so those two words really make an impact for
Yeah.
Frida to
Yeah.
reconcile with herself how she's feeling, to say it out loud, even though it's through the pen,
Yeah.
and also to acknowledge, like, this is where I am in this point in my life.
That was one of those, there are those points in a book where the writer's not writing. I mean, I know we've got a lot of writers in the room, so I know what they know what I mean. It's when you're writing the story and the story kind of the character takes over and does something that surprises you. Because I didn't necessarily know that Frida was going to get to any point on her journey where she would kind of come up short and just stop and meet a situation that was not what she expected it to be, and have a response that was not what she expected it to be. I actually thought she would go into Sarajevo and have a much bolder experience. But once she got into the country and once she started seeing what was happening, there was really only one response she could have, you know.
And Kate has a moment in the book that was jaw-dropping for me. There's a decision that she makes ultimately with her partner at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't think of the last time, or if I've had a time, my jaw literally dropped while reading a book. So if it happens again, I can say that this book was the last time.
I mean, I'm honored
happened.
because we've got you're a serious reader, and you're,
yes.
So
no, I literally, those last sentences, she's doing what? And I think because through the course of the story, she's in tune with her insecurity. She's in tune with, am I enough? Am I this? Am I that? Yeah. So for her to make that decision really gives her her power. Mm-hmm. And even if she's never had power, she's never felt that she has, it really just electrifies her in that moment.
Thank you.
So that was absolutely, as much as it was jaw-dropping, it was beautiful for her character in that place in the story.
I appreciate that.
Yes. And Frida is part Mexican, and she's Scandinavian, the Danish kind.
Yes, the Danish kind.
That was mentioned in parentheses. So how was creating her character? I know that she's from Love and Saffron.
Yes.
And so continuing with that, with her character as an adult, her relationship to food, her relationship to her parents.
Well, Frida's an interesting character because she was and wasn't a character in Love and Saffron, because she was just, so she hadn't evolved in any way at all. And when she arrived in Love and Saffron, it was not my intention that there was going to be a book about her. Mm-hmm. It was only, just a little backtrack. I knew when I wrote the book that there were going to be 3 books, but I didn't know what the 3 books were going to be. The first was Love and Saffron, and there would be 2 more books. There was a trilogy that somehow these companion books would all fit together. And I had actually been writing a book about my Grammy in the 50s. Yes. And it wasn't working at all. It just, I had 150 pages that were going nowhere. And I really think it was a reader who sent me an email telling me how much they liked Love and Saffron, and who mentioned, I would love to know Frida's story.
Mm-hmm.
And that stuck in the back of my mind. And all of a sudden, when I started working with Frida, she evolved as her own. She evolved so quickly, and she was even though Kate's based on me, Frida's the first character that I developed, because she was an actual character from Love and Saffron.
Mm-hmm.
And she's based on a lot of young women I work with here in Los Angeles. But she's also, as I said, a little bit of me. She's a little bit of my sister.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this before, her desire to make people feel special and to do special things for people. But it's hard because you don't have to think about these things until you sit in a bookstore and somebody asks you the question. Because you don't think about it consciously a lot of the time. You're working on it, and the character's evolving, but you're not consciously thinking, I'm going to have her do this, I'm going to have her do that. But it was interesting, especially to develop her relationship with her mom, who is the character of Joan in Love and Saffron, because I didn't know that I was going to do this, but in this book, they're at odds.
Mm-hmm.
Frida doesn't, Joan is a food writer in Love and Saffron, and Frida doesn't understand. Frida's a serious journalist, and she just does not understand the importance of her mom's work.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my way of saying I don't know, because I don't spend a lot of time, let's say, developing a character before I write.
Mm-hmm.
It evolves as the story is being written, and then the character comes out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you to the reader who sent you that email, because Kate and Frida would have arrived to us in some way, but it arrived at the time that it did. And yes, I think about, when you're writing a story.
Yeah. Because you're a novelist as well, so you understand these things.
You want to write well-rounded people who make decisions and who make choices and who have sacrifices and who have fraught relationships and have beautiful connections. And that's all within the story.
Thank you.
And so how did you write Kate and Frida's relationship with their parents?
Well, I sound like a broken record. Kate's relationship with her parents is my relationship with my parents.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, it was pretty straightforward in that. But I mean, obviously you can't just write from real life and plop it on the page and say, hey, this is going to work. That one was one that really had to work at. And I actually sat down once I had a draft with my sister and my mom. Mm-hmm. And we wrote some of these scenes together. So we actually worked through, because, my mom's relationship with my mom was raised by her dad, which was very unusual in the 1950s. And so we just talked a lot about what that felt like. And we went through pieces of the book. And not necessarily is this true, but does this capture the authenticity of the feeling of what you felt and how we felt about these things? And so developing, that was more just an exploration of my own past, and then also bringing it into the present with these conversations with my family on Kate's side. Mm-hmm. Frida was a little trickier because Joan is set in stone in Love and Saffron. I mean, obviously there's more to her, but I had to really think, what do I want to do to this character that I love in this book, as I have her daughter tell her part of her story in a different way in this book? And it was hard to hurt Joan a little bit, but it was a natural part of what happens to a lot of people in their 20s as they are growing apart from their parents, but then growing toward them in a new way. And that was what I really wanted to capture, was because you have that break And sometimes that break can feel so painful and feel like it's, oh no, we are just going in these separate directions as you grow up. But then as you evolve, you start coming together in whole new ways. And so that was really important to me. I would say that it probably happened faster for Kate and Frida because I had, a certain time frame in which to put them, for the rest of us, it can happen over decades.
Yes.
It can be a whole life process.
And there's a quote or Frida says, isn't it, and I'm going to paraphrase, but isn't it wonderful when we realize that our parents or our mothers are human beings?
Yeah.
And I'm at a point in my life where like, I'm truly realizing, like I've always known about the sacrifices and the choices that my grandmother and my mother in particular have made, but to really sit back and say, wow, like I've always been grateful.
Yeah.
But I really need to seep in that gratitude of just like, they aren't horrible people or whatnot.
Or they aren't just mom and grandma. They're actually these well-rounded
That's
human
a better
beings,
way of saying it.
They aren't just these awful things they did as not awful things, but I'm sorry, kids are rotten. So parents are having to, just do all these things that seem so mean all the time.
And let me clarify that my mother and grandmother are not horrible people. I'm just saying that
you go through that phase.
You recognize, I think I've always just seen them as mother and grandmother. I didn't realize that they had a life before me and that they had to have experiences in order for me and my siblings to have arrived in this world. Decisions were made and, love was brought together so that, I could be here. So I have to really revel in that and really give reverence to them.
Yeah.
And that's what Kate and Frida in their own way recognize that it's something that they want to give.
Yeah. And it takes them, they have to go through a journey to get to that point where they're saying there's a little bit of forgiveness both toward their parents and also toward themselves.
Right.
Because they have to forgive themselves for some of their actions toward their mothers. And then it's very layered. It's very complex, which it is for all of us. Anybody's got a parent, Yeah.
And it continues the human experience of just how do we connect with each other.
Yeah.
And as Kate and Frida are connecting with each other, how they connect with the people that are already in their lives. Travel is such a beautiful expression in this story. Paris and Seattle are the main cities in the story. How did you want travel and place to really work as a part of Kate and Frida's lives?
With Kate, I wanted to use Seattle as home, because there's a big exploration in the book of what is your home? What does place mean and not just your house, but what does place mean as far as your sense of home and your sense of self? And so that was the purpose that Seattle served. And Paris was not my first choice because I'd lived in Vietnam. I'd really had this idea that Frida would go to Saigon because that was the time period when I lived there. But it's a communist country and you couldn't write letters. So, you could write a letter, but it had to go through the social evils department and then it had to be censored and then it had to be sent across, it would take months for things. And there just couldn't be this flow. But I felt like I wanted one of the characters to be really anchored in her home. And I wanted one of the characters to be far from home to give her ultimately an appreciation of home, because I don't think Frida had because of how she felt about her mom, I don't think she had a full appreciation of where she was from. And then that setting was also necessary because it was adjacent to Sarajevo as far as her pursuing her career as a war correspondent.
And it creates for Frida this balance of just like the life that she gets to live and the
Yeah.
life that she wants to live as a war correspondent,
Yeah.
but it really ruptures her ideals of, or like she gets to leave
Yes.
Sarajevo
Yes.
and she gets to go back to Paris and to other places that she goes to, but because she wants to be a war correspondent, she has to really see the terrors and the horrors and live through it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, like in the letters that she writes, she's at a Holiday Inn.
Yeah.
So
Which
there's still some form of safety,
familiarity.
and familiarity amidst being in this country that is just completely being ravaged by war, and the children that she gets to be around, and then she's learning, she's really wanting to tell the story of these people, but isn't quite finding the grounding, and then it's going back to her doubting herself, like is she capable of telling this massive story? And it turns out she's the absolute vessel to be able to do that,
but not in the way she thought she was going to. And that was that was interesting, because I don't necessarily know that was in my conscious mind at all when I was writing this as well, because I thought she would go there and that's where she would find her voice. She found her voice, but just in a way that was very unexpected for her.
And what is for you that quote really arrives for Kate and Frida, just how their lives turn in the way that they thought that they wanted it to go to, but it arrives in a whole new place and provides this incredible perspective. And so it's just the way that the world is working for them to tell the story, or tell their stories, not quite the way that they want to, but in a way that ultimately says, I didn't think I could tell that story in that way. And I'm thankful that I can.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is an example. I've been trying to tell this story for a couple decades in different ways. And this is the first time it came out in a way that worked. Because all the other ways that I'd tried before were forced. I was trying to make the points, and I was trying to push the storylines, and I was trying to this is what I'm trying to say. Whereas when I finally reached this, it came out naturally. It had found its vessel, so to speak. Yeah.
And the Ramona Club.
People love the Ramona Club.
I love the Ramona Club. And when Frida was told that you shouldn't be reading children's books.
Yeah.
Absolute cyclops side eye. How dare you tell?
I know.
I had absolute words.
Yeah. For Nico.
Yes.
I almost called him by his real name.
Yes. Oh, okay.
But he wasn't mean like that.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I mean, that actually, so some of the characters, Frida and some of the characters in Sarajevo, connect over American children's books. And that came from my experience in Vietnam. I actually taught adults in Vietnam. I taught conversational English, but it was really interesting because I moved there in 1995. So the war had ended 20 years before, and all of these people had been raised on American literature. And so there were the conversations that they wanted to have about books. I remember one woman, she just loved Pearl Buck. She loved The Good Earth. She felt that book spoke to her experience. And I'd always loved that idea of all these people that I met, who we connected through books, even though our cultures and our backgrounds were so different. Our childhoods, because I had friends who were my age. I was in high school, they were in re-education camp. We talk about complete polar ends, but then we would find a story that we had both read and shared, and we would have such a deep connection through that story.
Yes.
And so it was fun to be able to take that concept and move it into this book.
And the Ramona Club really goes beyond just reading books. It's the advocacy and the giving
Yeah.
piece of it as well. And just what happens when human beings come together and form
Yeah.
community. It was literally just Frida talking with Kate about just the experiences of reading these books and what it's given
Yeah.
to the kids. And then it's like, well, I raised all this money, and
Yeah.
all you have to say is the intention of what you're doing for someone,
Yeah.
and people will really pour into you
Yeah.
and into the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And let me see, what is next?
I find this interesting. Ashley has not asked me a single question that I've been asked before. And I just got done with a 2-week tour. I am loving this. I am absolutely loving this. You
That is
should.
all-
It's amazing.
That is always
You're making my brain work extra hard.
That's
but yeah.
always the goal,
Yeah.
especially when you've been on a book tour.
Yeah.
So even if this was your first stop,
Yeah.
the next tour, I've had, other questions that have been asked.
Mhm.
So that's a real compliment to
No,
me.
this
I
has been, I'm
appreciate
loving
that.
these questions. I'm
Yes.
loving it.
Recipes are in
Yes.
the back of the novel,
Yes.
just like in Love and Saffron.
Yes.
I am absolutely going to make Kate's mom's
Oh,
peanut butter cookies.
They are very popular.
They're very few ingredients, so that
Forward.
works for me.
Yeah.
And
They're made with a cake mix.
yes.
Yeah.
And
They were made often on the book tour.
Oh.
A lot of people brought them to the different
Oh.
events.
Yes.
Yeah, which was really fun.
And then there were a couple of recipes I'm probably going to need 5 to 7 business days to really pour into
Yeah.
and the ingredients.
Yeah.
And the recipes really complement the story, just the ingredients, the joy, the discovery,
Yeah.
the insecurity of it all. So how was creating the balance of the recipes that are within the story? Frida's continuous mention of the chile rellenos,
Yes.
to her culture, and Kate's mom's peanut butter cookies. Just like, how is that balance between the real recipes and then the recipes that you created, the ingredients that you used to create this story?
That's interesting. The recipes came organically, like the foods that I chose came very organically into the story. And again, well, they're Kate's mom's recipes were my mom's recipes, but it was also just bringing in, I didn't come to like cooking and really being in a kitchen until I was in my early 20s. And so it was fun to bring that experience into the book and have Kate have an experience of anything beyond, canned and boxed food is new to her. Whereas you've got the complete opposite in Frida. I liked using the food and the recipes in the book to show they both had the same connection with food and family, but in very different ways. Because Frida, she'd eaten everything.
Mm-hmm.
She'd tried everything. Mm-hmm. She knew how to cook. And Kate didn't know any of these things. And by sharing these experiences with each other, they were able to bond, because they bonded over books, they bonded over all these different things, but it was another opportunity for them to bond. And I didn't really think a lot about how to use the actual, I've got to confess, putting recipes in the back of the book was my editor's choice both times. I'm not opposed to it, but she's the one who wanted to add them in the first book. And then when we did this book, she's like, we have to, add, you have to have the recipes again. But I will say having Laurie Cohen's tomato pie recipe is like one of the highlights of my life, because Laurie Cohen is my favorite writer in the world. And the fact she passed away when I worked at the bookstore, but the fact that her child gave me permission to take this recipe from one of her books was even more exciting to me than getting the book published. Yes. And we've developed a friendship now. But I had such a very emotional attachment to some of these recipes.
Yes.
The peanut butter cookie recipe is being after school with my mom and my sister, sitting in the kitchen, making cookies.
Yes.
And so everything in the book is, I used food to attach one character emotionally to another character.
And it goes also back to Frida being in Paris for the first time. And she says, I'm drinking
Yeah.
hot chocolate at Cafe de Flore.
Mhm.
And so the memory of eating something for the first time or eating something
Yeah.
multiple times,
Yeah.
and just the place that comes with where you had that experience or where you continue to have that experience.
I did love it. And this goes back to your travel question. I did love putting Frida in a place she'd never been before because,
Mhm.
and having her be able to try things, so many different things for the first time. But having her try new foods for the first time was really fun because when she does that, you get to see her as a character, how she responds to the experience.
Yes.
And it's a way of showing, you know, that she's open to adventure, that she loves new things. And so it's these little ways that you can use what you would think would just be a cup of hot chocolate
Yes.
to show her on a deeper level.
And then when you know, should she drink hot chocolate in the States, then, you know, she could hear the ambulance going by,
Yeah.
or recall hearing the ambulance going
Yeah.
by, or the birds, or just the smell of the
Yeah.
florals, and hearing people taking seats, even cigarettes. 'Cause
Yeah.
I hear a lot of French people smoke a lot.
Well,
so,
in the 90s especially.
yes. So just all
Yeah.
of the sensory memories
Yeah.
and memories that come with just from that simple cup of hot chocolate that'll carry
Yeah.
her for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Encouragement is a word that really seals the envelopes of
Mhm.
these letters between Kate and
Yeah.
Frida.
Yeah.
What other words or attributes would you say sealed the envelopes of these letters?
Acceptance,
Mm.
I would say, because I'm looking back on it after I wrote it. I love that these two characters just fully accept one another, even when they're pushing each other and even when they're arguing about certain things or trying to, they're never in a point where they're at odds, but they do really, you know, push each other to try harder, to do more. But the whole time they're doing that, they're accepting each other.
Mhm.
And they're accepting, I accept you for who you are, and because of that, I think this is what you can do, and this is why I believe in you.
Yes.
And so I think that would be one of the biggest words.
And also just saying, like, you are
Mhm.
this
Yes.
attribute. It's like, oh, don't worry about this person. Don't worry about this thing. It's
Yeah.
affirming them as you are.
Yes.
You intelligent, you deserve to be there. So it's
Yeah.
keeping it in the present
Yeah.
and really just as an affirmation more than just words on the page.
Mhm. I love that about the two of them because
Yes.
they really did believe in each other, and without they didn't have self-consciousness in their when they communicated their belief in one another. They were very I don't know, I'm trying to find a word and it's just not there.
It'll come to you at 3 a.m.
It will. I will text every single one of you. Just leave me your numbers and I will let you know what that word was. But they didn't, they just were not afraid.
Yes.
They were not afraid to state what they believed about the other person and really lift them up. And I wanted this to be a book about two women friends who do lift each other up.
Yes.
That was really important to me.
Kim Faye, thank you so
Oh,
much
Ashley.
for Kate and Frida. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. And thank you, Ashley, for your question.
Thank you.
This is
Any audience questions? Students have any questions?
I actually had a
Oh.
process question.
yeah.
Because you talked about not necessarily mapping out a character
Mhm.
that much in advance and letting the character evolve during the writing. Do you then have to go back and
Yes.
tighten up?
Yes. Yeah, you do. Because you'll find that by the time you get to the end of the book, you know the character. So then you can go in the beginning and go, okay, they really wouldn't do this thing, or they would have done it differently. They wouldn't have, or you tend to front load in the beginning and front load like all of the characteristics and all of the traits rather than having everything kind of unfold. So by the end of the book, you know the person, you have a whole big picture. So that's another thing too, is taking all those things at the beginning, go, okay, what do I pull out and what do I move? And how do I make it not confusing if I pull those things out? So yeah. Thank you, Jim.
Kind of related. So you,
Yep.
you said, oh, I'm sorry, did I step on
No,
something?
no.
It's probably a quick one, but it's related to that. So you said you knew that there were 3 books.
Yes,
You knew this was a trilogy.
yes.
Sort of, how did you know that? And structurally, like, where do you start? And like, talk
I've-
about the process of knowing that it's going to be 3 books, as opposed to one big thick book or
Oh,
a
yes.
series of short stories, or
Yes.
you know.
That is the answer to that is I don't know. I just knew.
Yeah.
I just knew once. It wasn't when I started. When I finished Love and Saffron, I just felt like there's some balance. But because I didn't want them to be sequels, it's easier. So you can read this and never have read Love and Saffron,
Right.
and you won't miss anything.
Right.
And if you read, and I'm working on a 3rd book, which is the hardest because it has all the characters in it, but I'm trying to make that a standalone as well, so that that story stands on its own, even though it has connections to this. But it gets, the first 2 were technically very easy because the characters are meeting each other at the same time as the reader's meeting them. The 3rd book's going to be technically very hard because they've known each other for a long time.
Mhm.
And so if I want a new reader to come along to meet them, that's causing me a little distress right now. Yeah. Yes.
I was wondering, did you write that all off the top of your head, or did you have did you have a journal when you were younger? Like, how did you remember everything? Because you said it's from the time of your 20s.
Yeah,
right?
I have journals upon journals upon journals. I actually went back and reread my journals from the time of this this book takes place. So I mean, that was at a time there was no Instagram, there was no internet, I didn't have a TV.
Mhm.
I mean, I wrote my journal probably for 2 hours a day, and so I have that, but also, as I said, I wrote other things. So when I turned 40, I wrote a memoir
Mhm.
about this time. It was not instigated, but it was sparked by, there are 2 characters in this book who passed away when I was 40, and they are the 2 of the main characters. And that caused me to take some time to reflect on this period in time. So I had a lot of material to look back on, especially for this. You sometimes forget some of those immediate feelings that you had at that time
Yeah.
period, but then also just some of the funny references that were a part of your life that, you think, okay, Scrunchy is funny, haha, 90s, but you forget about a lot of the little things that were part of daily life that aren't just, they just slide away. So I did spend time going back, but then it gets really hard because like, well, I want to include that story, but that story is not really relevant to this story. So there was a lot that I had to cut out and just say, now you're just, you're putting that in just because you want it in. It's not serving a purpose in the story. Yeah.
And is it in this book or the book before how the 2 characters meet?
Kate and Frida meet for the first time in this book. And then Frida's mother. So this book's written in letters and Love and Saffron's written in letters. And so Love and Saffron, the 2 characters in that book, also meet for the first time. One of them sends a fan letter to another woman. One is a food writer here in Los Angeles, and she sends a fan letter to someone a woman in Washington. So that's how they meet in those. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Do you write off an outline? Do you plot?
No, I don't. I had a bad plotting situation when I was in college. And it's actually not a joke. It's very funny, but it's not a joke. I had a teacher in my last year of college, and I wrote a book using a how to write a novel book.
Mm.
And so I wrote this book, and I got an agent. I wrote a novel. I got an agent, and the response from the agents, or the response from all the publishers, was, "This is the most predictable book. This book is so predictable. We can tell what's happening. We can tell where it's going." And so I actually went home and burned my how to write a book, and it was very hard to. It's harder to burn a book than you think. I put it in a wood stove. I was like, I needed to purge myself from this. But I find that I probably map a little bit ahead, so I'll map this far ahead and then I'll write and then kind of like that, because I do need to know a little bit where I'm going. And the interesting thing is in both books, I knew the last letter. I wrote the last letter right toward the start of the process. Yeah.
I just
Yes.
wanted to compliment Ashley. I
Oh,
love when you said, what were the words they sealed the envelope with? I thought
Yeah.
That was really lovely because that is what you did, and you
Yeah.
have a thought as you sealed the envelope.
Yeah.
And that was really a lovely thing. I mean,
It
Kim knows
is.
what I feel about her.
Well, and Connie is like, I've been writing with Connie for 20 years. So she's like, I got no questions, man.
Yes.
I thought that was
No.
really a nice turn of phrase.
Thank
But it goes
you.
with the book, but it is true
Totally
because
does.
I hadn't thought about that one word that brings that you want this story, these characters to come together with. Yeah.
And that's a part of their connection. Like it's only
Yeah.
a few letters that have been exchanged between them, but Frida's already saying like, you are this person. And Kate could say, yeah, and go back and read that letter and say, yes, I am this
Yeah.
person. And so whether it's a bad day or a good day or just a moment, those letters are really a testimony for her.
That is interesting because I go back and read letters. I've gone back and read letters from grandparents, from exes, from family, from friends. And they do anchor you in that way. And I hadn't really thought about them going back and rereading the letters, but they would have.
Yes.
They would have, because that's what you do with them.
And I can imagine Kate going and buying some big, beautiful box.
Yes.
And she opens up the flap and I want to read today,
Yeah.
a letter from a week ago. I want to read a letter from a month ago. And these letters expand years.
Mhm.
So it's years of letters
Yeah.
between them. And even as so much time has gone by, or there's time when they're not writing
Yeah.
So quickly to each other,
Yeah.
they still have those letters that they can go back to, and it really keeps
Yeah.
the warmth between their connection.
Can you feel my brain ticking? Because in the third novel, Kate does come across the letters.
Okay.
And I'm like,
I need the third
but I'm like
novel.
this. I'm like, tell me more about what you think about this.
Yes.
because that is a part of it, is they come across the letters from both the books.
Yes.
And it moves the story because it's an exploration of these two in middle age and Joan in her 80s. So it's a big part is reflecting back.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when the box opens, it's like this glow that comes on Kate's face. Here's a pen. Yeah. Yes.
The first person in my acknowledgments. Ashley.
Awesome. Thank you guys so
All right.